You're listening to The Heart of Now, radically honest conversations about living free from suffering, hosted by Elizabeth Rayner and Monika Rose. Welcome, everyone, all the wonderful people who are tuning in with us today. We are incredibly fortunate to be speaking with Richard Miller. Richard gratefully comes to us today through our first guest, Lama Paulin Jolma. Richard is a prominent figure in the field of mind-body wellness, best known as the developer of the Integrative Restoration iRest program of meditation, and is founder, chairman, and executive director of iRest Institute. His career, spanning over 5 decades, has been marked by significant contributions to the integration of Western psychology and neuroscience with the ancient non-dual wisdom teachings of yoga, Tantra, Advaita, Taoism, and Buddhism. In addition to his role at the iRest Institute, Miller is co-founder of the International Association of Yoga Therapists, C-IAYT, founding editor of the professional journal of C-IAYT, okay, got that right, and past president of the Institute for Spirituality and Psychology. These roles undermine his commitment to bridging the gap between traditional spiritual practices and contemporary scientific understanding. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
His work,
in the
particularly
now.
in the era of
to
trauma,
learn more,
healing,
visit us
and
on
wellness,
Instagram
has been
at the Heart of
influential
Now
in the yoga
podcast
and
or
psychology
online
communities.
at theheartofnow.info.
You can learn a lot more about Richard and all of his accomplishments at iRest.org.
Welcome, Richard. So good to have you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Monika. It's nice to be with you.
Yeah. I would love to dive in because your background is so incredibly rich, and I would love to know a little bit of your backstory, if possible. How you got those 5 decades of experience. So what has been the most catalytic moment to date of your self-discovery?
Every time someone asks that, it's interesting. I always go to 2 actual events. One, when I was 13 years old, when I used to visit my grandmother for spring vacations, and she loved sending me to these dances and Saturday night, Thursday night get-togethers, and which I never really enjoyed. So she'd drop me off. I'd walk through the front door and walk out the back door and go out for a long walk on the beach down in Florida where I was. But one night, I accompanied by a really dear friend of mine who I had met while I was on spring vacation. We were wandering along and we decided for whatever reason to lie down in the sand trap of the 8th fairway of the golf course that was nearby. And it was a beautiful starlit night without a moon. And as a 13-year-old boy might do, I looked out into the universe and thought, I wonder where the end of the universe is. And in my vivid imagination, I went out into the universe and I came to a brick wall. And I thought, well, this must be the end of the universe, but I wonder what's on the other side of the brick wall. I ended up, I don't know how many brick walls I came to. I kept jumping over them in my imagination. And all of a sudden, everything melted away. And I felt this sense of being one with everything, the universe, everything around me. It just was very startling. And I don't know how long I lay there in that mystical experience, but then I got up with my friend and we walked back into our teenage life as if nothing special had happened. Only years later when I looked back, because in 1970, when I was new to living in San Francisco without any friends, I decided to attend a yoga class, not knowing anything about yoga, not knowing anything about meditation. I thought it might be a fun way to meet people. Little did I know that the course, which I was signed into for 12 weeks, would be taught in silence. So I never met a person, actually, because we walked into the building in silence and we left the building in silence at the Integral Yoga Institute. But that first evening at the very end of the class, the woman taught what I now know was a rudimentary yoga nidra practice. And I had that same exact experience I had at 13. I walked into that room at the Integral Yoga Institute feeling a bit alienated, isolated, lonely, and I walked out again feeling not separate, one with everything. The subtle or not so subtle depression that I had been carrying for some years was gone. Sense of isolation, alienation, disconnection was completely wiped out. And I felt as I walked home, one, what just happened to me? And how do I duplicate this? And how do I learn more about this? And that really set my journey off, because some weeks later, I was working at a clinic learning the art of psychotherapy, and a woman had just arrived from the Far East. And we got to talking, and she asked me, why was I at the clinic? And I told her I was interested in learning the art of psychotherapy. And she said, well, I'd be happy to pick you up as a mentee. She became my mentor. For the next 5, almost 6 years, we spent literally 12 to 18 hours a day. And she had grown up in a Buddhist community, taught yoga to her by her mom, and had studied with one of R.D. Laing's senior teachers, Robert Hall, and had personally studied with Eric Fromm. So she came to me with a Buddhist, humanistic, existential, phenomenal background, and taught me the art of psychotherapy, because she said, if you're going to learn it, then join me in every session that I give. So I started doing co-therapy with her. But in that first session, I entered in with her. At the end, we went into a little room and we would start to talk about what happened in the room. And she said, so what happened when you were in that room? And I gave her this long-winded psychological spiel about the person we'd been seeing. She listened very attentively. And then when I stopped, she said, no, I want to know what happened in you when you were in that room. And that really started my studies on many different levels. One, just really a deep self-inquiry examination of myself, my own psychology, and how I work with emotions and thoughts. But also we would have long discussions about meditation and its integration with Western psychology. So I started taking yoga. I started sitting Zen Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism. Eventually, I met a wonderful Taoist teacher from China who taught me the art of Taoist meditation. And very slowly, I began to integrate all these Western and Eastern perspectives. And it led me to where I am now, with a lot of adventures along the way.
Sounds like whether you chose it or not, from an early age, you learned the art of surrender.
Well, when I was a small child, from the age of 5 on, I had severe migraine headaches and allergies. It turns out I was allergic to everything that had to do with a cow. And I drank lots of milk. On Thursdays, my dad would barbecue up a steak. I'd have hamburgers, hot dogs. Not until I was 18 years old did I find that I was allergic to cow. And fortunately, when I did, and I stopped eating everything that had to do with the cow, the migraines and everything went away. But they were so severe that at times I would be hospitalized. They'd put me to sleep because of the pain.
Wow.
But what I learned as a 5-year-old was to lie down on my bed in a dark room, put a pillow over my eyes, ice bag on my neck and my feet, and not have a thought. Because I found and discovered back then, if I had a thought, the pain would come. If I had no thoughts, the pain would recede. So just as a 5-year-old, I was forced, now looking back, into a meditative state, which then when I really started meditating, I realized, I had developed a skill even back then, unbeknownst to me, that would serve me later on as I started working in meditation and looking at these different perspectives.
Well, that sounds like a version of yoga nidra that you were actually doing at that age.
Monika, it's true, because as I started studying yoga nidra, you're right, we lay down in a supine pose with our eyes closed, and we would begin to inquire into what was going on inside of us. Back then, I was learning from the Bihar school, which brought in a lot of the cultural mores and perspectives of India. But as I began to really dive into it, I realized a lot of what they were asking of me I could do, but they were culturally specific to India. Like, could you visualize an antelope in your heart, an elephant in my belly, and other kind of visualizations and colors and forms? So I realized as a Westerner, what if instead of imposing those kinds of images, I just let myself feel into my body? Where did the sensation want to take me? And was there a memory, an image that came spontaneously or a color? And back then I was starting to teach. I'd been invited to teach yoga. So I would have my students do the same thing. I'd have them inquire into their bodies. What were the sensations most calling them? What were the emotions, the thoughts? And then we went from there exploring more spontaneously what would arise. That led me to really begin to look at the protocol of Yoga Nidra in a very different way. How would I bring it to a Westerner? Using the skills that I was learning, certainly from the Buddhist perspective and the yoga perspective and the Taoist perspective. But my students really became my gateway for honing it in its delivery and how to help another person really inquire into it. And then in 2004, the military heard of my approach through one of my students and asked me to do a research project. And so we launched a research project with returning wounded warriors with trauma. And it was so successful that we became integrated into their health deployment clinical center. To this day, any wounded warrior going through their healing process can access my protocol. We're in not just Walter Reed now, but we're in about 85 VA sites around the country. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, it has been an amazing journey.
Yeah. And tremendous gift too. So thank you for that. Monika, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, that's his iRest program for those people who are curious about it, which is based on Yoga Nidra.
Yeah, and interesting you bring that up because the military, when I started working with them, said, we're military, we don't meditate and we don't do yoga.
Right.
Call it something else. So I came up with the name integrative restoration because it integrates our psychology and restores us to an innate sense of well-being that's, as I've discovered, indestructible and innate within all of us. And as an acronym, I called it iRest with a small I to put the ego in its proper position and rest for that restoration. And the military said, we can do iRest. So all of our research was based on the Yoga Nidra protocol, but calling it iRest.
I love it.
And it's so funny because 2 years after the research project, they came back to me and they said, we like the protocol, we like what you're doing. Call it anything you want.
Yeah.
So I call it integrative restoration, iRest, yoga, nidra meditation. So when I go into a hospital or a clinical setting, I call it iRest. If I go to a Buddhist center, I call it meditation. And if I go to a yoga center, I get to call it yoga nidra.
There you go. I love it. So I'd love to move us along to our second question, which is really a question about how does humanity deal and solve the challenges we're currently facing? There's just so much happening in the world and so much intensity. People are feeling a lot of emotions. And what do you believe are kind of the opportunities, both individually and collectively, for us?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really important and critical question on so many levels because people are struggling with all these intense situations, whether it's economic, but now climate change, migration, politics. What I see is people are feeling so isolated or alienated or helpless that they don't feel that they have a role that they can really be helpful with. And it leads them to feel a sense of separation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always thinking, how do I help people heal within themselves any qualities of separation they feel within themselves and then with the outer world as well? There's a beautiful line from a sacred Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, that says, I think rightfully so, whenever we separate from an emotion that we don't want to feel, a situation or a circumstance that we're averse to, and we're trying to fix or change it. Whenever we separate in any way, we're going to find ourselves feeling some sense of stress, distress, anxiety, or fear. And so what I'm helping people do through the work is heal first any kind of separation they're feeling within themselves so they feel deeply connected to themselves, and then to be able to look out at the world not feeling separate from other people around them or from the trees or the rocks or the mountains, so that they come into proper relationship with themselves and the world around them. And with that sense of deep connection, I know that people have within them the capacity to meet these challenges. And the metaphor I like is the sense that we've all been given a garden to live in by life. And I see everybody tending everybody else's garden and not tending their own. And so I'm trying to help people first understand the garden that they live in, get connected to themselves, heal whatever needs to be healed within themselves. And then what I see is spontaneously people see them in that deep connection and then begin to invite them into their gardens and how they may help them. So I think
Beautiful.
healing this inner sense of separation that we're all prone to as human beings gives us access to creativity within ourselves that we're all going to need to meet these incredible challenges we're all facing.
I mean, I know you work with a population that has a lot of anxiety and a lot of PTSD. How do you help someone who is very uncomfortable potentially in being quiet and sitting? Like, how do you help them understand they're not separate?
Yeah. So many healing programs that I've studied begin often with what's wrong. What I try to do is begin with what's right about a person. As one veteran from a study we did in Miami said, every program that I had ever been in for healing my PTSD had always emphasized from the beginning what was wrong that I needed to overcome. You're the first program that helped me find and locate what's right about me from the very beginning, so that I wasn't healing to become whole. I was healing from my wholeness that you helped me discover. So I have some simple interventions that in the very first session when I work with a person or a group, I introduce them to help them locate what I call an indestructible, innate sense of well-being that is outside of the trauma, so that I'm helping them realize while their body and their mind may have anxiety or stress or trauma in it, they themselves are free from that trauma. They are not needing to be healed. The body and the mind do. And there's some simple inquiries I help a person engage that helps them locate this innate sense of well-being and an indestructible sense of ease and peace we all carry within us. But what I've seen is we've separated from it when we were little children and lost touch with it. It's easily accessible. It just needs to be nourished on a regular basis. And when we discover it, or I would say rediscover it, and we know how to nourish it on a daily basis, it becomes this incredible inner resource or ground or foundation from which then we can meet these challenging circumstances that we all find our way into, whether it's a stressful situation or anxiety or depression or grief. We have the skills within us. I've discovered very simple tools that people can learn easily. They just need to practice them and put it into place.
And those frameworks that you've created are so easy, simple, accessible, that when someone has that PTSD, I've myself have healed from that fairly recently. You need to understand that it's not this long road that's never ending, that there is something that you can do daily to incorporate in your healing process, and that you have the empowerment to be able to do that.
Exactly.
It's not outside, right?
Yeah, it's not outside of us.
Yeah.
It's within us. We have that. The body is such an incredible healing force. And I'm aware I can help people find the tools. I call it an owner's manual.
Right.
And I realize some pieces we'll struggle with potentially for the rest of our life. But when we know the tools of how to meet those issues that may continually arise, we have the power within. We feel empowered then. But some people are able to heal completely from their trauma, their anxiety, depression. But I want to make sure people have those tools in their toolkit.
So healing the inner sense of separation, that's such an important point that you're making. I'm wondering, can you tie that into how we free ourselves from the suffering that we experience? And maybe they're one and the same. What do you think about that?
I see how they're one and the same. The moment we begin to separate within ourselves, there's an emotion that begins to arise. And rather than welcoming it as a helpful ally, I call them allies, we try to fix it, change it, get rid of it. We create an inner atmosphere, we might say, of self-hatred. People are meeting their emotions, their memories from that place of trying to get rid of them. And I think it's kind of tantamount that, if you showed up at my doorstep and you were my neighbor and you were having a difficult moment and you said, may I come in for tea and a little bit of conversation? I'd love to discuss this with you. And I said, well, you're welcome to come in if you'll go away. That's the way I think people are relating to their emotions, their thoughts, and their past experiences. Sure,
Right.
I'm welcome. You're welcome to come in if you'll go away.
Right.
And I think of our emotions and our thoughts. Trauma is undigested material that's needing to be brought back in and synthesized and metabolized and integrated. So if we can help people not face themselves as if they want to change themselves, but really learn how to welcome themselves and accept the challenges that they're working with, I know that they can find the solutions that ultimately those emotions will disperse and dissolve.
Right. Right.
But we have to really face ourselves from an attitude of accepting and welcoming and kindness, not self-judgment. And not from the perspective that there's something wrong with me. I like to help people recognize it sounds like there's something wrong here, but let's not confuse something's wrong with something's wrong with you. And let's see if, again, we can find that ground of foundation of well-being, then we can meet what does feel like it needs our attention.
Right. It reminds me a little bit when you explain it that way of internal family systems work, right? The parts work a little bit, which is interesting because again, all is welcome. If that's the truth and there's nothing wrong, then the healing, it just happens so much more organically.
Well, there are two parts of our protocol, the protocol I've developed, where we actually ask a person to take the challenging emotion or thought or memory and imagine a door opening if it were to walk into the room, and they started to dialogue with it, to come into right relationship with it. It is that kind of parts work you're talking about we find in family systems therapy, because as a psychologist, I studied all these modalities and integrated them into my protocols. So we have both the Eastern meditative approach built into it, but also elements of working with parts, psychosynthesis, rational emotional therapy, DBT, EMDR. They're all integrated into the approach. For instance, when a person is having a difficult emotion, I'll ask them to feel it somatically in their body and where and how they're feeling it. And then say, if it had an opposite, what might that opposite be? And if you were feeling that somatically, where would you feel that in your body? And then to go back and forth, feeling each of these opposites in turn, and then to feel our way into both at the same time. And the research shows that when I feel one opposite or the other, I'm in a decidedly interesting place in my nervous system and my brain. But when I go to feel them both at the same time, it switches me into a whole nother part of my brain, the defocusing network of my brain, which is where we get insights. spontaneously coming to us that won't come when we're just working with one opposite. And so it's really important when we're struggling with a difficult emotion or circumstance, a depression and anxiety, we can get hung up like on the horns of a bull, is the metaphor.
Yeah.
Right.
If we just switch to the opposite, we can get hung up on the other horn of the bull. When we hold both opposites at the same time, we go through the horns of the dilemma into an insight we otherwise might not be able to access. So
Right.
we
Sounds
are
like
working
non-dual, actually. It's just a non-dual perspective, right?
It's a non-dual perspective that's helping us open up channels in our nervous system that we need to be able to access for healing.
And that's the beauty and the brilliance of your work to me, is that you've incorporated all of these different methodologies and philosophies into a very simple framework that's accessible, but it's so rich and layered and offers a tremendous transformation.
And it's somatically based. So we're really using our body as a processing plant, you might say. It's not intellectual, although we're using our intellect. But we're looking for profound shifts actually in the body. And when those shifts occur, people really step out of the anxiety or the depression or the situation that they were facing into a whole new world of well-being and ease and what we might call the peace that passeth all understanding.
Love
nice,
that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So, Richard, our next question for you really is, how are you committed to truth? And I know you've actually been talking about that already, but I don't know if there's any other insights you might want to share about your own personal experience.
Yeah, I think for me, the journey has really been one of stepping into what we might call radical acceptance and radical authenticity. There's a series of inquiries I go through when I meditate in the morning and have been for decades now. I'll ask myself questions like, am I safe and secure with myself? Is that true? And then I look for any place within my body or my experience in the day before or the days prior where I might have shaved the truth in some way or stepped out of my authenticity. And then I look at, okay, how can I recapture that sense of authenticity and truthfulness? So I think for me, it's really one of speaking truth, my willingness to be heard and seen and to see you and hear you. So to me, it's got to be radical authenticity, our willingness to be the totality of who we are as a human being, but also as an expression of this underlying essence that I feel has given birth to the entire universe, of which we are each a very vibrant and unique expression, may I say. So I think of each of us as a unique expression. So when I look out at the two of you, I see each of your personalities, the different flavors you are, the different ways that you are unique.
Don't forget the neuroses.
I
got some good ones for you, Richard.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing the essence that connects us all, that isn't separate.
Right.
So that when I'm relating, say, to you or to another or to a tree, I'm relating from that underlying essence that I've discovered we all share in common. Because what I realize, if we're able to meet each other from essence to essence, then we can celebrate difference, but we're not going to get involved in violence. Me trying to change you. And if you're still trying to change me, then I'm going to be asking you, well, can you say more about that? And how is that for you? In other words, I'm not going to fight with you. I want to come to a deeper understanding of yourself as I work hard to come to a deep understanding of myself. So I've worked very diligently, and I've had incredible teachers and understandings that have awakened that kind of underlying essence in me that I carry with me, that initially I thought I was trying to get in touch with, that I was responsible for. What I've come to realize that it's within all of us, and when we get in touch with it, it starts living us. And so when somebody asks me, how are you living life? Then I would say, I'm not. I feel like life is living me, and I'm giving my all to be in harmony with that sense of life.
Right. I love that perspective so much. And I was just thinking when you were talking about that, my son's in 6th grade. And so right now it's all about fitting in and being one with, right? There's no deviation from. And he always says, I just don't want to be called weird. And I said, well, you're limited edition. That's what this is, right? And he's like, yeah, limited edition. I like that.
I like that. You got to learn how to do these reframes.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, who doesn't want limited edition? I know I do. I love the way you articulated that. And I think maybe this next question can dovetail into that. It's about joy. How do you, since you are authentic and you live in integrity a lot, and that we love the word radical on this show, don't we, Monika?
Yes, for sure. For sure.
So that fit right in our wheelhouse. How do you live in joy? What is it for you?
I'll turn it around on its head. I'll say joy is living in me and wanting to express itself constantly now. As I really felt into, and that experience at 13, and then that experience at 22 when I was in San Francisco in that first yoga nidra class. And then with my mentors, I've discovered that living essence that I think has given birth to everything in the entire universe, myself as a unique expression of it. Joy, I see, gets liberated then. It's in us. How do we liberate it? And I think as we become more and more in touch with ourselves, heal that sense of separation, align with that inner essence, I'll call our essential nature, what I have found is that joy and a deep well of well-being, peace and ease just start to bubble up. So I like spending at least part of my day sitting and being in touch with that joy and that well-being, which I've found even then when I'm in a moment of grief because a friend has died or some challenging, stressful situation, that joy and that well-being is there. It's the ground again from which I'm meeting the circumstance. So I think as we align more with life and we do that switch over to from I'm living life to life is living itself through me as its unique expression, I think that joy just starts bubbling up, that well-being, and becomes the life force then from which we're meeting life. And I have found in times of great grief, sadness, stress, that well-being is there. It's not being covered over now as it did when I was a child. I've grown it, nourished it, and I nourish it on a daily basis.
Oh, lovely.
I had a feeling you might answer that way just based on your last answer. So I walked right into that one. That was good.
Well, it does dovetail back to that sense of suffering. Why is it that we suffer? I think it is because we are trying to change our circumstances versus first accepting them. And I remember one of my mentors, Jiddu Krishnamurti, who I spent time with, fortunately, in India and in Ojai. I remember him being asked, what was his secret to living life? And everybody kind of got very hushed as he was about to reveal his secret. And he said, I don't mind what happens. I'm willing to be with what life brings to my table. And I think that makes all the difference. We stop refusing life and we align with it. And life's going to bring difficulties to all of our tables, as it is now with climate change and economic, political, migration. But I feel like when we're in touch with this essence and we're really feeling we're connected with our humanity, we can solve these problems. They're not insolvable issues.
Right. I love that. I love that secret.
It's a good one.
It reminds me of just quickly of the when something happens, I often hear the voice of my head say, "Oh, is that so?" Like it's just neutral. It tries to be neutral, then my ego and mind kick in. But I like that. It's just
Well, it
badass.
is. I
It's
mean,
a
that's the way that
surrendering
I
to
meet.
what's
That's like
here.
I
Yeah.
can try to deny it, but it's in my face.
It's right here.
And when you
So,
deny it, the more it becomes an issue. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really
well,
the piece
I
of it.
love that whenever we deny, the body keeps the score, and it'll start giving us some sense of something's not right.
Right.
If we're willing to look at, okay, what doesn't feel right here? Because if we don't, then the ego will pick it up and start saying it's not just that something's not right, but something's not right with me. But that's a secondary response. The primary one is something is off here. Let me see what feels off and address it. Then I don't have to go to that next step, which is something's wrong with me,
Right.
which we will go to if we miss that first vital step.
Yeah, so true.
And I think
so
it's
true.
Tara Brach that calls that the second arrow.
Buddha,
Yeah.
there's the famous story of somebody coming to him with a
Right.
disease, and he's asking Buddha all about it, and Buddha says to him, do you want me to tell you all about it, or do you just want me to remove the arrow? So we're all caught up. Not the first arrow really is something feels off. The second arrow is when we try to fix it, change it, alter it before we understand it.
And like you said, turning it on yourself. That's the mistake.
Yeah, if somebody gave me a watch that was broken and asked me to fix it, I wouldn't start taking it all apart. I'd very slowly begin to study it to see what needs fixing. And then when I would find that, fix that, and then the watch would be. And I think that's how we need to face our own issues. We don't want to try to take them apart analytically too quickly, but really probe them, understand them, and then the insights will radically and slowly emerge.
Yeah, we don't have the patience a lot of the time to be witness.
Well, what are the secret ingredients of the secret sauce? Patience, perseverance, and curiosity.
Yeah. And loving kindness. Let's not forget that one.
Absolutely.
Because
loving kindness and
equanimity.
Yeah.
Well, so if you had a global microphone, what would you say, Richard? That hasn't already been said, and there's been so many moments of deep wisdom. So I am curious what else you have in your toolkit.
You remind me of a project that was done in Germany of people who were hating migrants who were coming in from other countries. And so in the research study, they took someone who was really against the migrants who were coming in, and they had them sit with another person from another culture. And they had them sit just looking at each other in silence for 12 minutes, or 10 or 12 minutes. What started happening is they started feeling each other's humanity and in a way began to fall in love with one another. And when they followed these people post-research, they found that they were becoming friends and helping each other. How do we learn to meet each other out of our humanity, not as other, but feel that inner essence that we both share in common? We're all just human beings doing the best we know how and trying to do the best we know how. If we could help each other, meet each other in that sense of brotherhood, sisterhood, you might say, then I think we would go a giant step as humanity working with these challenges that are facing us. So that's what I try to do in my retreats, in my trainings. I actually put people face to face in silent dialogues and helping them feel this inner essence, and then to start to talk with one another out of that essence. And I do that with my clients who I see in my psychology practice. I want them to feel that inner essence from which I'm meeting them, and then they stop hating themselves, they stop judging themselves, and they start to find the creative solutions that they need to face the problems they're facing. One of the first things I ask people is, tell me what's going on. And they'll say, well, I have this pain. And I'll say, okay, where do you feel it in your body? And now, can you take the conceptual label off of it? Meet it non-conceptually. And that's when people start to have these radical breakthroughs, when we peel off the conceptual mind and we start to meet it at a very deep, very personal level.
Very energetic, really.
Yeah.
Very energetic.
That's lovely. Well, it's been so wonderful connecting with you, and thank you so much. There's just so much rich material that I'm going to go back and listen to.
And I would recommend your book, the iRest book that you wrote, the introduction, The Open Secret. It is so rich, that paragraph that you wrote right there alone. And we can put that in the show notes so people can see. We're going to direct people to all of your books and to your website. What else would you like people to go to find you?
Well, first I'd say sit with themselves and find the inner essence, because then you'd find me in that inner essence.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
Touche.
We didn't get to practice what that is. I kept wanting to ask. Could we?
Yeah.
But we're out of time. So that just means another conversation with you.
Definitely.
Well, just the simple taking a moment of our day to just be, peeling off the conceptual mind and just spending 5-10 minutes just being. These kinds of insights come naturally. But otherwise, my website, www.iRest.org, we have a free course that helps showcase this protocol, this 10-step protocol that I've developed, where people can begin to learn it for themselves or take our trainings.
Lovely.
Beautiful.
All right.
Wonderful. Will you come back and see us for part 2 of this conversation?
I would love to come over and then do the actual experience. And it's so simple. It's like a 10-minute little inquiry that opens this gateway into a deep, indestructible sense of well-being.
Okay. We say yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Richard. Take good care.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for being here with us today in the Now. To learn more, visit us on Instagram at the Heart of Now podcast or online at theheartofnow.info.